Red. You see red everywhere. The stock markets have plummeted because of the new US tariff policies. The few investments you had turned worthless practically overnight. The economists say that this is new territory. How could something like this happen in our lifetime? This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. And there it is again. Those dreaded words. You've heard them before. When COVID hit the streets and lockdowns were enacted, when the housing bubble of 2008 popped, the dot-com bubble, 9/11. For as long as you have been alive, you've had to endure these once-in-a-lifetime events again and again. They don't even surprise you anymore. You think to yourself, what's the point? I'll never get out of this cycle before life puts me down once more. I'm practically one more once-in-a-lifetime event away from joblessness. So you start doing your usual routine. You go to your bed, take all the beer you have left in your house, chasing them down with a couple of White Claws for the flavor. Hit your Macho Mega Mango flavored vape and start looking for anything to take the edge off. If life's going to bring you down, at least you get to sizzle out on your own terms, slowly fading away as history's already starting to forget you, completely numb and detached from the outside world. Then, you see your window light up and you look outside and it's a meteor barreling towards your house. All the nihilism instantly evaporates from your body as you realize that you could have at least tried to live life more. In spite of all the horrors, in spite of everything, you blew your one opportunity. Your one shot. Now knees weak, arms are heavy, dropping all of your store-bought 7-Eleven spaghetti. You're about to be faced with a violent, abrupt end. And the worst part is, you're full of regretty. Memento mori. The reminder that death is inevitable, and dreading over the future or agonizing over your past only leads to more suffering in the present. Many people don't get a second chance at life, and they don't have this realization before the dread and depression take over. But it's a very sobering experience to say the least, and trust me when I say this, you really want to live your life to the fullest before your inevitable end. Even if you don't consciously think about it, because it sure as hell does come up in your last moments. Many fall into the trap of slowly sizzling out, not even really noticing how their reaction to bad events are only prolonging and maximizing their suffering. So even though your feelings of depression and dread over the future are rational and logical, setbacks, even major ones, shouldn't stop us from living the best life we can under those circumstances. We only see the true value of things when we don't have them, or almost lose them. We take them for granted. And as someone who had an NDE, I can tell you that I saw the value in life straight away, but sadly, only when it was about to be taken from me. So please trust me when I say that even if you feel terrible right now, life is not only worth living for, but can also get much better. The problem is, most people believe it gets better with time alone, but that is in my opinion, a very harmful misconception. Because it does get better, but only if you put time and effort into achieving your goals. It doesn't happen automatically, and you still need to work for it, but it does get better with time and progress. Sure, some things will inevitably affect us, but true happiness comes from within. And while trying to improve your conditions around you can be beneficial, you also have to improve internally, because you could be just as depressed in a private jet as you would be under a bridge. Outside conditions can help but aren't everything, because we only experience life through ourselves and through our minds. Our happiness and success in life isn't purely bound by the state of the world. There's a good amount of wiggle room, otherwise we would be depressed at all times. But first, we have to admit something. Something happened. A lot of things are actually happening right now, and a lot of them are extremely hard to ignore. Even if you don't watch the news because you know they're trying to do the old useless scare on you, because your emotions have been monetized, it is undeniable that our current situation is becoming more difficult in the foreseeable future for most people. For example, the tariffs that Trump has been announcing on and off has turned into a global cat and mouse game of trade conflicts. Only if the cat in this situation is covered in Cheeto dust to look like Garfield and has severe schizophrenia and keeps seeing mice where there are none. A lot of people have lost a lot of money on their 401ks and their savings in general, because of circumstances entirely out of their control. In fact, I remember being taught in university that the ETFs, bonds, and the S&P 500 are some of the safest investments you could reasonably make. Well, so much for that. The financial institutions we thought were safe are now being tested as we speak while entering economically uncharted territories. Needless to say, a lot of people are feeling really bad right now, especially because this is like the 6th big event of the century. I mean, come on, the economy potentially entering into a recession after COVID and after the 2008 financial crisis, not to mention the dot-com bubble bursting in the 2000s. When will we catch a break? I know the Lenin quote that there are decades where nothing happens, and weeks where decades are made, but I feel like we're living through those decade-defining weeks every other week. And that's being generous. Or maybe it just feels like every other week because time has been speeding up significantly for most of us, on top of the fact that we need time to process these major earth-shattering events. So let's look at them through a more rational lens to understand our current situation. Okay, so the 2008 financial crisis was our proper introduction into crisis time. I would say popping the housing bubble that was there previously, while ironically creating a new bubble that is much more difficult to pop, resulting in gradually increasing housing and rent prices. So, even though most of us remember the 2010s pretty fondly, and it was a relatively peaceful period of time, we kind of went through a silent recession actually, with quite significant inflation and cost of living increase, even before COVID. The 2010s are referred to as an economic tragedy, quote, a needlessly wasted decade during which bad policy decisions and cynical politics condemned millions to unnecessary joblessness and hardship, according to Jordan Weissman. So, let's pause there real quick. Can you see how our hardships are actually cascading from one another, instead of simply being one once-in-a-lifetime event after another? It is a huge domino effect that has yet to conclude, especially when it comes to the economy. The year 2020 was insanely tumultuous, with not only a global pandemic overtaking the world, but also massive civil rights protests against the police, sparked by the unjust conduct under which George Floyd passed away. To me, this event also signaled the major distrust over the American police force that has built up over the years, leading to conflict between authority and the people. And now let's talk about the big one, the big bad wolf of the 2020s, a decade, maybe even a century-defining event depending on how things go in the future, COVID. It might not have been as lethal as other pandemics like the Spanish flu, but it mutated at an extremely quick rate, making it very difficult to contain, and for scientists to develop an effective vaccine for it. As I'm writing this video, there is yet to be a vaccine that can effectively stop COVID and its variants completely, like the polio vaccine for example. This also has a compounding negative effect, because due to the way the first COVID vaccine was handled, many people are now distrustful of Big Pharma and the government's intentions. While COVID was not necessarily the most lethal disease out there, it is among the most expensive pandemics we have experienced, maybe even the most expensive. At least in recent history, with the cost of living and essentials skyrocketing. Various aspects of life now became even more expensive and borderline unaffordable for some, also leading to more people living paycheck to paycheck. I've seen it myself. You can make a six-figure-a-year salary, but depending on the area you live in, looking at you, New York, you can just barely avoid homelessness and battling rats on the street for pizza. The US created approximately $6 trillion worth of currency between 2020 and 2024, one-third of all money that was in circulation previously at $15.4 trillion. Of course, many countries were affected very negatively by COVID economically as well, like Germany, who has had a shrinking economy since then for the most part. All around, it was a global economic disaster that was mitigated through massive money printing and using up most of the reserves available. So even after 17 years post-2008, the economy never really recovered like it should, and was made worse by the Black Swan event that was the pandemic. Then, in 2022 and 2023 respectively, major wars started that affect us in more ways than one to this day. So while there's genuinely a lot going on, when it comes to things like the economy in particular, the recent Trump tariffs are not what caused them to be so bad overall, although objectively it is worse now, and out of all the things that were major unexpected global events, one man, his goons, and his policies, single-handedly crashing the economy was probably something people expected the least. Because of course a pandemic would be bad, right? Or war, that makes sense. But the president of the US just pump and dumping crypto coins and stocks like it's nothing, maybe Cruelty Squad was onto something. So of course Gen Z and the poor millennials are really tired of it right now. But when it comes to researching tumultuous times in history, you'll quickly realize that the claim of once-in-a-lifetime events happening so frequently right now is technically true, but it's kind of misleading. In history, humanity tends to go through all sorts of cycles. They aren't set in stone, but there is a tendency for major historical events to repeat after either a certain time period, or more importantly, after major advancements in technology and/or sociology. And because these cycles tend to be longer than the average human lifespan, it's true that they are once in a lifetime, but I have reason to believe that we are entering a new age, and this transitional period is the reason why so many insane once-in-a-lifetime events are happening all over the world. So, of course, considering that artificial intelligence is completely changing the game in the job market, and this isn't just fear-mongering. I've talked to people active in the IT industry, for example, and now they're struggling to find work because ChatGPT really isn't that bad at programming. People forget that that's kind of what it was made for, but still, it really does look like we're at the very beginning of a new industrial revolution. And I'm a huge critic of AI, but I simply cannot deny its impact, especially in more monotonous and easy jobs that require no creativity. AI excels in them. I think another major part in the transitional period we've been actively experiencing is global warming. Whether it's entirely human-made or a natural process that has been sped up by humans is still debated, but its existence is undeniable. And with global warming come new trade routes, oil excavation sites, and livable landmass in the north. This is also why the US has been eyeing Greenland for a while and Canada as well. There's a very real chance they might take them by force, and because of these many changes occurring at once, the world is kind of a powder keg right now, just waiting to blow, creating this intense tension we are all feeling. We are also globally interconnected now, so issues in one country can cause issues that can be felt all over the world, which I believe is a contributor of the increase of once-in-a-lifetime events. We all feel them now, in a way, instead of just one group of people. Bad events have just kind of always happened throughout history. Granted, much more frequently since we have lived in a very long era of relative peace, but something is always happening. There's a reason why the four horsemen are famine, pestilence, war, and death. We have been dealing with these curses of humanity for as long as we can remember, and the four horsemen are also related to each other. For example, eggs are more expensive due to bird flu, for the most part. When a country is starving, it's more likely to go into a resource war, and death is the penultimate result of the other three. It's always been the dream for us to end disease, world hunger, and war, but so far, they've just been a part of our life, and it looks like the cycle is repeating again. Something is always happening, it just affects different people in different ways that vary in intensity. But what has changed is how the public deals with these events. Alright, let's try to find the last time in history humanity went through a pandemic, war, a recession, and a depression. Oh no. As you might have noticed, the early 20th century had eerily similar events happen as well. But that doesn't mean that it will play out again one-to-one, although we should learn from our mistakes and tread very, very carefully. So, I'm going to put this bluntly. It all sucks. When things are bad, they are bad, and I don't think trying to pretend that everything is fine will help anyone. If you've listened to me before, you probably remember me saying that you shouldn't be watching the elite-sanctioned fear slop they put out there to keep you afraid and miserable. But even if you have been avoiding the news, things like the tariffs will undoubtedly impact you, and probably the people close to you. Even if you're a penguin living in the McDonald Islands. Heck, I've already been affected by this myself, and the tariffs aren't even in full effect yet. Because the dollar is now much weaker than the euro, so if you are paid in dollars, you just lost like 10% of your pay over BS. So I think it is safe to say that things are tough right now, and it'll probably get worse before it gets better. But it's okay. How? Well, because terrible news and bad global circumstances are just part of the equation. What is much more important than the bad things themselves is your reaction to them. Because logically, after seeing the economy crash right as you're entering adulthood, or in the case of the millennial, right as you're about to recover from the previous one, this will make you feel all sorts of emotions. Most of them relating to pain though. And the most common response to bad global circumstances or just bad personal events I have seen is to numb oneself with drugs, corn, doom scrolling, binge watching, and junk food. Bed rotting all day for good measure, and probably all of the above. But avoiding suffering is not the way to go. Trust me, I have tried the path of nihilism, and it actually makes you much more miserable than the pain you were trying to avoid in the first place. It is also true that suffering builds character, but your life shouldn't be pure suffering. But I think most people don't get to choose their suffering, they're just kind of stuck with it. And I don't think suffering by itself builds character, but the way you handle the suffering does. A coping mechanism on its own is rather beneficial for our mental stability, otherwise we wouldn't develop them as a response to huge mental damage. Most of our bodily and mental functions serve a purpose for survival, and the betterment of yourself, but the problem is that we live in a world where your coping has been weaponized against you. There are so many options for making the pain go away in an unhealthy but effective way, and they're also so easy to use and abuse, and so accessible. I don't blame people at all for falling victim to them, but it doesn't have to be this way, and while coping mechanisms can be good if not abused, they also shouldn't necessarily be your only way of dealing with struggle, because we can deal with it in a way that stops it completely, so you don't need to cope anymore. And be honest, would you rather avoid it by trying to numb it or escape from yourself, which as you know isn't really possible in a healthy way? Think of it like this. Would it make sense if you broke your arm riding a bike, and you decide to cut it off so you don't feel your bones aching? No, of course not. You're just adding damage to yourself by making the pain worse, and spoiler alert, phantom pain exists. So even when the arm is gone, you will likely feel residual pain, and I've seen too many people do this to themselves mentally. Remember, if we can't improve our objective global conditions, the only thing that's left for us to do is to improve our subjective experience of life. Depending on how you respond to tragedy and bad situations, your response could be setting you back literal years. So in this video, I will tell you the best methods I have found for coping with your mental pain in a healthy way, and potentially even resolving the issue altogether. A lot of us tend to stack problems instead of slowly solving them over time. In my search for getting better, I have tried all of these methods personally, so it's not just some vague hypotheticals I'm talking about. They were tried and tested, at the very least, by myself. So let's start with the whole numbing yourself thing, because notice how I mentioned pain is the primary feeling, even though a lot of people would say that they cope to get away from the sadness. And I'm not being pedantic here, many people believe being sad is inherently bad. I myself was raised to literally never be sad. Even if I felt like nothing is worth it anymore, I should smile until I gaslight myself into being happy. Or that I shouldn't be sad because I wasn't part of the Holocaust and because I'm not homeless or a starving child in Africa. Thankfully, I was able to recognize that this is a clinically insane rhetoric and that my feelings and emotions are just as valid as anyone else's. It's not a contest, it's your personal experience, and while yes, you should be thankful for what you have, and remember that some people have it worse, it actually does not help in making you feel better. In fact, you'll probably feel worse for daring to be such a jerk to the homeless. And I think sadness has a terrible reputation as an emotion, even though Pixar did try to improve its reputation. Sadness can be very healing under the right circumstances, and you shouldn't force yourself to avoid it at all costs. We have a built-in way for dealing with terrible circumstances and situations, and that is that very same sadness. It only becomes an issue if you feel sad even if your circumstances are objectively good, or if you think you're sad for no reason. But if your sadness is logical, I would suggest maybe letting it do its job. If you keep avoiding it, you might resort to bottling up your emotions, and as we know, this is a fantastic strategy for eventually crashing out and ruining your life Walter White Cellar style. Or you numb yourself, putting yourself in a state of arrested development and doing really insane crap just to feel something. Think about it, would you rather be sad for a week or numb indefinitely for the near foreseeable future? If you struggle with actually expressing the internal sadness you feel because either you struggle to cry or let your guard down in general, I would actually suggest watching sad media or listening to sad songs to help you get through the situation. This is of course very dependent on you as an individual, because it might backfire and make you feel worse depending on what type of person you are, especially if you tend to already be extremely empathetic towards everything and everyone. But for the emotionally repressed archetype, sit down, make yourself comfortable, put on a song of your choice, particularly one that resonates with you, and let it all out. It's okay to not be okay. It reminds me of that one scene from Midnight Gospel. There's no way to stop a heartbreak, so what do you do about it? You cry. You cry. If that's not enough, try finding a character you really see yourself in and watch them go through a sad situation so you can trick yourself into feeling empathy for someone who is similar to you. For me, the easiest way I've found to make myself cry on purpose in certain situations, because actually, knowing how to cry on command is useful beyond processing your emotions, so do with that info what you will. But what does it for me is the ending of The Iron Giant, where, spoiler alert, he sacrifices himself for the sake of humanity while mimicking Superman. Really gets me every time, man. Of course, crying isn't the only way to let out your emotions. Meditation also works well. Exercise, or even producing art in some way, can help you process the pain you've experienced recently. But I'm sick of a lot of this toxic positivity rhetoric online, because being sad all day isn't being unproductive. You are still working through these emotions in a healthy way, and it can take a bit. As you know, it only becomes a problem once it is a constant instead of a temporary break. There is also this stigma that sadness is a sign of depression, and while it can be, in isolation, it's a way for us to deal with pain. I mean, come on, even babies know how to do it. And some types of depression skip sadness altogether, replacing it with anger and frustration. Try to also think about which aspects of your current situation make you sad specifically, so you can address them more accurately. There is such a thing as a beautiful sadness, but there's also ugly crying in the bathtub. We really shouldn't stigmatize basic human emotions just because they're also uncomfortable and a sign of pain. Also, I'd probably recommend doing this alone, since most people are conditioned to make you stop crying, and they mean well, but when it's really bad, you just gotta go through it. And then, depending on how you feel, calm down and relax for a while, or cheer yourself back up again with a well-deserved treat. Of course, you can also always go to therapy to help you with all of this, but as you know, most people don't have the time or the money for this. And now, here's the biggest thing I learned while trying to find methods that help me deal with stress and even a state of depression massively. There is a cycle you need to enter, but not a vicious one. My original methods for coping were trying to do things I thought were fun, or at least anything that would give me a small dose of dopamine. But because I was kind of depressed, fun things weren't fun anymore, and this just stressed me out even more, entering a cycle of perpetual suffering. But then I learned that internally, our brain strives for emotional equilibrium, not necessarily maximizing pleasure. In fact, it has mechanisms in place to prevent you from gaining the same amount of pleasure every time from a dopaminergic activity. And before you can be happy, you have to first not be down in the dumps, or in a neutral state. Trying to cheer yourself up with fun or dopamine-rich activities doesn't work, because you are likely in a state of survival when you're feeling very stressed. Originally, we weren't as advanced as we are now. This survival mode helped us focus on escaping from our current situation. For example, a predator lurking in the tall grass. Of course you shouldn't be having fun dancing when a starved bear is about to pounce on you. This survival mechanism makes complete sense in its natural setting. But we live in a world where the predators are usually much more abstract and invisible, so we never really get that relief of knowing we are safe, thus never exiting survival mode. And I have to say, the amount of perpetual stress the average person is on is also completely unnatural. We were designed to adapt to our general area and environment, and we didn't really need to care what goes on beyond that. But now, because some angry old carrot decided to crash the economy possibly on purpose, you might not be able to afford eggs this week. This constant abstract attack on our psyche, combined with the added social pressures that are more or less used to happen naturally with time, like needing to find a partner for example, only worsened by more isolating lifestyles, and having to invest your money in such a way that you'll be able to go into retirement, on top of simply surviving, I believe is what is at the core of our issues. We are a pack animal, or at least we used to be. It is easier for us to deal with problems in a group. But here's what you can do to get out of this survival mode and finally have some relief wash over you. So, this may sound a bit silly to some, but I want you to go outside preferably. And start running as fast as you can. Full sprint. It doesn't matter if you're bad at running. Now imagine a bear is chasing you. Sprint until you're decently exhausted so your body is going, oh crap, this is for real. And then imagine yourself getting away and finally stopping. This tricks your mind into thinking you have finally evaded the threat, so you can now exit survival mode. If you can't run due to injury or disability, I think this would work just as well with swimming. Although that one I haven't tried myself, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. The feeling of just calm you get is amazing, and now that you are finally out of this survival mode, you can actually focus on other things that don't involve pure survival. This is actually the key that was missing to completing the stress response cycle. Basically, perceiving a threat, your body reacts to it, you respond to the threat, and you reach safety or neutralize the threat. This is also why you have to imagine yourself getting away instead of just vaguely sprinting for nothing. As you might have noticed, most people in the modern life get stuck on like the first 2 steps, maybe even the third. And it's obviously proven to be really damaging for us to be permanently stuck in the cycle. So here are even more ways to potentially complete the cycle, because some of my viewers might not be able to exit their house for one reason or another. And no, I'm not just talking about needs. I learned that some people here are getting bombed if they step outside, so I really hope your situations may improve in the future. And may peace arrive soon. And if your survival mode is logical and benefits you, it is probably better for you to stay in it for a while. Instead, focus on the small joys you get throughout the day, and think about how you can reach safety. Alright, assuming you are safe now and not in an actively life-threatening situation, we can continue. I've mentioned crying before, but you can also put yourself in a sense of safety potentially if you're laughing like the jongleur. Sadly, in my personal experience, this is less effective than the sprint, and it doesn't really work at all if you have depression on top of being in survival mode, at least from what I've seen, but it can definitely work sometimes. If you force yourself to laugh, eventually it'll trick your brain into actually laughing, and it can really alleviate your situation. Laughter also really breaks the tension completely. If life is being too serious, realizing how silly it all is also makes it far less intimidating. Laughter, in my opinion, is a generally great coping mechanism, with the only downside being that it doesn't really work if you're not in the mood for it. Be warned though, it can look like a manic episode from an outside perspective, and not gonna lie, it feels really weird forcing yourself to laugh at nothing. But hey, they say laughter is the best medicine, right after black tar heroin. Excessive cheering at even the slightest achievement by yourself can also help you get out of a state of paralysis, because as you might know, our standard bodily responses are fight, flight, or freeze. So if you are frozen all the time due to stress, and you finally manage to get out of bed for example with determination and willpower, give yourself a massive round of applause, and the cheering will hopefully trick your mind into believing that you have avoided the danger. These are some of the more extreme methods to get out of survival mode, but you would probably want to stay in that feeling of neutrality, what some people would describe as feeling normal again. So let's look at how we can stay and consciously get ourselves out of the super stressed Minecraft hardcore world. Let's start with something simple. Try some deep breathing exercises to calm yourself, preferably with fresh air. Or maybe try meditation, but that's not the only way to get into this state of zen. Exercise is another great method I found, especially emotion that doesn't require you to focus on it all that much, and one that you can repeat many times over. You can also try to calm yourself down with art. Either doodle what your heart desires, with no pressure to create a masterpiece, just let yourself speak through the canvas. But art can come in many forms. Wood carving is something I found to be quite relaxing, or chopping wood in general. Or you can take your stress and frustration out on a punching bag. There's really a wide range of things you can do to calm yourself down and get into this sort of zen state that helps concentrate your mind and focus. Because without focus, you're just aimlessly trying to solve vague issues and problems that might even be related to each other, but you're too tangled up in your spider web of a mind to realize. Without focus and accurate observation, we fail to detect the source of our problems, thus making them unsolvable. Knowing what specifically is wrong with your life and thinking about ways you could either fix or accommodate for it is more than half the battle. When you're focused and keeping your mind occupied, it's much harder for you to fall into that doom spiral of seeking never-ending pleasure to escape from your situation. Realistically, you have to cooperate with yourself to escape, which a lot of people struggle with. I know. I mean, you've had to deal with your antics and shenanigans for literally every nanosecond you were alive and conscious. No wonder you might have trust issues, but you are the catalyst for change, so you have to accept yourself. Leading us nicely into our next step, acceptance. If you can't change the situation in any way, shape, or form, and you've tried everything, the only healthy thing left to do is to accept. If you constantly try to push yourself mentally into a better world by going to your favorite childhood games, for example, or by numbing yourself every single time even the slightest discomfort arises, you will live in this pain. I know that escapism has been made ridiculously easy through modern technology, and so many people are doing it because it kind of works for at least a little bit, but for any change in your life to occur, and to build your new reality around these unfortunate circumstances, you need to accept that this is what it will be like. I've seen this time and time again with people, for example, who became obese during the pandemic, but were too embarrassed to show themselves in public, so they stay inside, and get even more obese because they start stress eating even harder to cope with the fact that they perceive themselves as fat now. But think about it, is it really that bad to be in an unfortunate situation and want to change? Sure, you will be the fat person already sweating because you walk to the gym instead of driving. This is who you'll be for a while, and that's fine. Or if you didn't lose your V card when you were a teenager, that's it. You can't really become a teenager again. So you have to accept that it's just a part of who you are, but it doesn't have to define you. We call ourselves lots of names, losers, failures, disappointments, but so what? If you're a loser and accept that right now, you just are one. So what's stopping you from winning? Because if you lose or fail, you'll still be a failure and a loser in your mind, right? So nothing changes, but if you succeed, then suddenly, you're a winner. A champion, as some might say. It's okay to be afraid of trying. It's okay to feel like you're powerless, but keep trying nonetheless. You have everything to gain. Accept your current situation as it is, no matter how brutal it sounds or how depressing it is, because it's not our environment alone that determines who we are. It is our actions, and our response to what life throws at us that determines what we're really made of. Now, instead of the doom cycle a lot of people get trapped in, or the never-ending stress cycle, let's try to get into a joy cycle. Dante's paradise, so to speak. Alright, so you start the day off by being depressed. So first, you have to calm yourself down and focus with your activity of choice to get into that neutral state. Remember, there is a difference between stress-relieving activities and fun ones, so it is crucial to not confuse the two. Then, have some fun or a pleasant activity, because all work no play makes Jack a very dull boy. And when you're in a pleasant mood, use that moment of lucidity to start doing something challenging or working, so you start associating work or difficulty with reward. Usually, the optimal cycle would be work before reward, but someone who has been under a ton of consistent stress for a while, on top of depression, usually needs at least one day of true relaxation before they can start doing the things they need to do. And, pro tip, if you're feeling like you're just gonna procrastinate the entire day or mope around in bed, just take that day off if you can, or do the dreaded thing you wanted to do tomorrow, because then you can actually rest instead of being in that constant state of procrastination, which is actually just as stressful for the most part than just doing the task. Proper rest is just as important as proper work, but then of course, you have to keep challenging yourself ideally, because it makes you stronger mentally for future challenges. Do you know the feeling when a game is too easy? It's not much fun then, is it? So what makes you think a ridiculously quote-unquote easy life would be fun? Even people who got enough money to never work again still choose to partake in work or self-impose difficult goals. Because in our life, we need a balance of rest, focus, creativity, fun, and challenge. This is the actual real way of maximizing your personal enjoyment from life, not by gooning for 12 hours while watching 16 split-screen TikToks. It bears repeating that joy is not the only good emotion. However, if you start the day with not being depressed, you can actually go from calming yourself to challenge immediately, and reward yourself with some fun. This is the best cycle in my opinion, and the one you should strive for. Being stronger mentally doesn't just make things easier, but it's also way more fun. And to all of the people feeling hopeless right now, like why bother trying when all of these once-in-a-lifetime events keep happening, and I can't even deal with getting out of bed half the time. You're right, there is no hope, and you won't be getting any hope anytime soon. Because you are the hope. It's not some tangible resource you can acquire or run out of. We don't have a hope meter in our brains that once it's broken never recovers. We don't have any of that. Because we are the hope. We are the embodiment of the concept. Only you can start by asking for help, actively working on solutions and trying to get better. Because you are the catalyst for not just the change in your life, but also the change in others. Almost funny how we convince ourselves that our actions don't matter, yet if we ever invented time machines, one wrong step could change the course of history. We are the ever-changing element in this universe. Without us, there would be no witness. Without us, our planet would have never changed to fit our will. We are the thing that makes life worth living, because without us, there is no life. You are all the hope you will ever need. As long as you're alive, you can change your life and others in ways you didn't even realize were possible. To help you out of your situation of overwhelming stress and nihilism, you can also try helping another person. Even if you yourself aren't okay, helping others is good for our mental health, and it is also proof for your mind that you can help other people, so you can also help yourself, and some issues are much easier to deal with if you view them from a third perspective. Remember, at the end of the day, you can ask yourself these questions. Why is my life so hard? Why does it have to be me? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Why do I have to suffer? And for what? Is it going to change your circumstances? Is knowing who the perpetrators behind your prolonged suffering are gonna make you happy? Gonna make you content? Is the knowledge that a random arrangement of particles being behind your suffering going to change your life? Or knowing that it's God, or something we don't even know how to describe? Will it help you change? Will you become better? We don't know much about this world. Frankly, we don't even know how much we don't know. But what we do know is that only you can change your circumstances through your actions. You have the power to set off cascading events through the butterfly effect. You are all the change you need in your life. You are the farmer who plants the seedlings for your success in the future. You matter, and what you do matters. We know that, but the amount of change a single person can achieve is mind-blowing. You matter in a way that is beyond human comprehension. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons, whose support is greatly appreciated. And shout out to my newest Patreon member, Merle, or Merla. I have a Discord server linked in the description below if you want to join. Like and subscribe, and bye bye.